If someone asked Mikey to describe his home, he would not talk about the walls, the furniture, or the smell of old wood. He would talk about the silence, a silence so sharp it could cut, a silence that followed him through every hallway, every dinner, every night spent lying awake. At 17, Mikey looked like the kind of boy who should have been free tall, slim, a clear complexion, a face that could have been on a magazine cover if life had been kinder. But his eyes told another story. They never stayed still. They darted away from anyone who looked too closely, hiding the restlessness, the fear, the constant calculation of how not to set someone off. His mother had been gone for years. One day she packed a suitcase, stepped over the threshold, and vanished into a life where he did not exist. Since then, Mikey had lived with his father. David, a man carved out of rules and anger. David had the posture of a soldier in the temper of a storm. Everything had a standard, and if Mikey failed to meet it, the punishment was not fists or belts, but words that cut deeper. A misplaced dish on the counter was called laziness. A sigh was called disrespect. Even the small silver hoop in Mikey's left ear, a tiny rebellion, was declared a disgrace. Not a man's choice. His father had muttered the first time he saw it, and Mikey had learned to keep the rest of himself hidden. Only Kevin knew the truth. Kevin, his best friend since they were kids, had been the first and only person Mikey told he was gay. Kevin had not laughed. He had not turned away. He had simply nodded. And in that moment, Mikey had felt the rare warmth of being seen. But Kevin was outside the house. Inside, Mikey lived under glass, every move inspected for cracks. He had a small collection of clothes tucked away at the back of his closet, not bright or flamboyant, just simple, gender-neutral pieces that felt like him. He never wore them at home. They were for a future he was not sure would ever come, because in that house, the walls did not just hold the roof up, they held in every unspoken rule. Rules about how a son should walk, speak, dress, and most of all, who he should be attracted to. Mikey moved through the days like a ghost, careful not to leave too much of himself behind. He learned the art of silence, of answering questions with as few words as possible, of erasing the evidence of his true self. But in quiet moments, when the house was empty, he would stand in front of his mirror and imagine a different life, a life where his father's voice didn't carry judgment, a life where he could let his eyes rest, let his shoulders drop, and just breathe. It is strange how you can live under the same roof with someone who raised you and still feel like an intruder. Mikey knew that if his father ever discovered who he really was, the walls of this cold house would not just keep him in, they would close in and push him out. And somewhere deep down, he feared that the day of discovery was not far away. Stay with Heart's story for what happened when that day came. Because once the truth stepped into the light, there was no going back, and the silence of Mikey's home was about to be shattered forever. Rain tapped against the window in a slow, uneven rhythm, the kind that made the air feel heavy. Mikey sat at his desk, a textbook open but unread. The soft hum of the desk lamp was the only sound in his room. Outside his door, the house carried the same stillness it always did until the sudden weight of footsteps on the hallway floorboards broke through. The door swung open without a knock. David stood there, his frame filling the doorway, shoulders tense, eyes sharp. "The chores," he said, his voice already hard. "They're still not done." Mikey turned in his chair, his heart skipping. He had planned to finish them after studying, but explanations never worked with his father. David stepped in, scanning the room as if hunting for something. His gaze fell on the corner of the closet, where the door hadn't shut all the way. In 2 strides, he was there, pulling it open. Folded neatly inside, tucked behind a box of old sneakers, were the clothes Mikey had hidden for months: a simple cream coat, a pair of soft trousers, a scarf in muted earth tones. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, but to David's eyes, they might as well have been a confession. His brow furrowed. "What's this?" Words came low, dangerous. Mikey swallowed, his mind scrambling for something that would not ignite him further. But then Sharon appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable except for the faint, knowing curl of her lips. She stepped inside, tilting her head toward David. "I told you, something about him isn't right." The room seemed smaller. The air thickened. David turned back to Mikey, and the unspoken question, the one Mikey had feared for years, now stood between them. It was not a question he could outrun anymore. "Is there something you want to say?" David asked, though his tone suggested he already had the answer. Mikey's pulse thundered in his ears. His mouth felt dry, his legs unsteady, but the truth forced its way out, sharp and unplanned. "I'm gay." For a moment, nothing. No sound from David, no movement from Sharon, just the hollow thud of rain outside. Then the silence split. "Get out," David said. His voice didn't rise, but it was colder than a shout. "Get out of my house." "I don't raise that." The words struck harder than any blow. Mikey felt his throat tighten, his hands numb. Sharon's eyes gleamed as she stepped aside, clearing the path to the door. Mikey's body moved before his mind caught up. He grabbed his backpack from the floor, stuffing inside whatever was closest to hoodie, his phone charger, the wallet with barely enough money for a bus fare. The door slammed behind him, the echo following him down the street. The night was a blur of wet pavement and flickering streetlights. The cold bit at his skin, seeping through the thin fabric of his hoodie. His phone buzzed once in his pocket, Kevin's name on the screen, and for a moment, Mikey thought about answering. Instead, he typed 2 words and sent them before the battery gave out. "I'm done. There is a cruelty in being cast aside for something you cannot change." That night, Mikey learned how quickly love can be withdrawn when it is built on conditions. In the years to come, he would carry the memory not as a reason to hide, but as proof that unconditional acceptance is not a given. It must be built, fought for, and protected by those who truly mean it. The wind on the bridge was sharper than the rain, slicing through the damp fabric of Mikey's hoodie as though it wasn't there at all. He sat on the concrete ledge, his knees drawn up, his hands gripping the cold metal railing. Below, the river churned in dark swells, reflecting only fragments of the street lamps above. The sound of water rushing against the support pillars seemed louder than the passing cars. Kevin's sneakers slapped against the wet pavement as he approached. His chest heaved from running, his eyes wide as they found Mikey's silhouette against the night sky. "Mikey," he called, but his voice barely carried above the wind. Mikey didn't turn. His gaze stayed fixed on the black water, his expression distant, almost calm. He spoke as though Kevin were already beside him. "It's strange. When my mother left, I told myself it was because of my father, that maybe she just couldn't live with him. But before she walked out, she looked at me and said, 'Some people are born wrong.' That was her last gift to me." Kevin's steps slowed, his throat tight. Mikey's voice didn't waver, but the words dug deep. "And tonight, my father proved her right. I've been measuring myself against their love my whole life, and I never came close. If the people who brought me here see nothing worth keeping, what's the point of staying?" A gust of wind sent a spray of rain into Mikey's face, but he didn't blink it away. His hands loosened slightly on the railing. Kevin edged closer. "There's more than them. There's more than this." Mikey's laugh was soft, bitter. "Is there even God doesn't want people like me? I've prayed to be different. I've begged for it. Every time I thought I was getting stronger, something proved me wrong. Maybe this is the only way to end it." The words landed heavy in the air. Kevin's mind raced for something, anything to pull Mikey back. But the truth was, this wasn't a single moment. It was years of quiet erosion, of small cuts that had bled him dry. Kevin reached out, but Mikey shifted just enough for the gap between them to feel endless. "If I jump," Mikey said, his voice low, the noise stops. The silence stops. Everything stops. There was no drama in his tone, no attempt to scare, It was simply a statement, the kind that comes when someone has already been living at the edge for too long. Kevin felt panic press against his ribs. He wanted to tell Mikey about all the lives that would shatter if he was gone, but he knew Mikey wouldn't believe it. So he said the only thing he could manage, please, just stay with me. One more night. For the first time. Mikey glanced at him, and the emptiness in his eyes sent a chill through Kevin deeper than the wind. The bridge hummed with the vibrations of another passing car. The rain thickened, soaking them both. Somewhere in the distance, the faint echo of footsteps approached, but Kevin didn't hear them yet. That night, the bridge became more than steel and concrete. It became a threshold, one side holding the weight of everything that had pushed Mikey here, the other side holding the faintest possibility of something different. And sometimes the smallest shift can change the path entirely, but only if someone is there before the final step is taken. The footsteps came faster, heavier, cutting through the hiss of rain and the roar of the river below. Kevin finally turned toward the sound and saw a shadow break into the spill of yellow light from the nearest street lamp. It was David. His clothes clung to him, soaked through, his hair plastered to his forehead. His chest rose and fell in ragged bursts, but his eyes red, raw, and locked on Mikey held none of the cold steel that had driven his son away hours earlier. Kevin froze. In his mind, David was the last person who should be here. He had imagined the man at home, unmoved, maybe even relieved by the quiet that Mikey's absence left behind. Yet here he was, striding forward with a desperation that seemed to swallow the distance between them. David didn't look at Kevin. His attention never left his son. "Mikey," he said, the single word breaking in the middle, as though it hurt to speak. The boy on the ledge turned slowly, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "If you jump," David said, his voice rough and uneven. I jumped too." The rain blurred his features, but the tremor in his tone was clear. "I've failed in more ways than I can count. I've failed you more than anyone else, but I will not fail in being your father, not tonight, not ever again." Mikey's grip on the railing tightened, as though bracing himself against the words. He had not expected anger to be replaced with pleading. He had not expected his father to come at all. David took another step closer, the soles of his shoes slipping slightly on the slick pavement. "I don't know how to undo what I've done," he admitted, his voice breaking again. "But if you go, I can't stay here either. I won't." Kevin held his breath. The wind swept the bridge, rattling loose bits of metal and carrying the smell of rain-washed asphalt. Mikey's gaze darted from his father's drenched figure to the black water below. The certainty he'd felt minutes ago began to fracture, not from logic or persuasion, but from something older, something buried under years of hurt. David reached out a hand, palm up. "Come here," he said. But it wasn't an order. It was almost a plea. For a long moment, Mikey didn't move. His breath came fast, the storm raging both outside and inside him. And then, slowly, his fingers loosened from the railing. He turned and stepped down from the ledge. David closed the distance in an instant, pulling him into an embrace so tight it felt like it could hold back the night itself. Mikey's body shook not from the cold, but from the weight of everything breaking open inside him. For the first time, the arms around him didn't feel like a restraint, but a shelter. Kevin stood a few feet away, rain stinging his face, watching the moment as if it were something fragile and rare. He knew words couldn't erase what had been said, or undo the years of silence and judgment. But he also knew that survival often begins in the smallest of choices, like deciding to stay when leaving seems easier, or reaching for a hand when every instinct tells you not to. On that bridge, in the heart of a storm, a father and son stood in the first fragile space between breaking and mending. And sometimes that space is where change is born, if both are willing to stay in it long enough to let it grow. The rain that night eventually gave way to a pale morning, the kind that left the air smelling of wet asphalt and raw beginnings. In the days that followed, Mikey stayed quiet, unsure if the fragile moment on the bridge would survive the return to daily life. David, too, seemed cautious, as though aware that a single wrong word could send them both back into the shadows they had only just stepped out of. It was Kevin who broke the silence first. One afternoon, Mikey found him leaning against the bike rack outside the library, his hands buried in his jacket pockets. There was a weight in Kevin's expression, but also a kind of resolve. "You should know," he said. "I called him that night. I told him everything. I begged him to get there before it was too late." The truth hit Mikey like a slow, deep current. Kevin had been the one to bridge the gap neither he nor his father could cross alone. Without him, the outcome on that bridge might have been written in stone. Later, another truth surfaced. Mikey noticed David leaving the house early on Saturdays, returning with a stack of folded papers and a coffee cup bearing a logo he didn't recognize. Curiosity led him to follow one morning, keeping his distance until his father stepped into a modest community center. Peering through the glass door, Mikey saw a circle of people, men and women of all ages, speaking with the kind of openness that had never lived in their own kitchen. At the front of the room, David stood and introduced himself. "I'm the father of a gay son," he said, the words steady but weighted. "I came here because I didn't understand. I thought I was protecting him by making him tougher. But I see now I was just protecting my own fear. I'm here to learn how to be better for him, and I'm not leaving until I do." The sight lodged deep in Mikey's chest. This was not the man who had slammed the door in his face. This was someone who had decided the work of being a parent didn't end when it got hard. It began there. Weeks later, David asked Mikey to join him for a meeting. The air in the room buzzed with quiet conversations until David rose again. But this time, he reached for Mikey's hand before speaking. The pressure of that grip was steady, grounding. "This is my son," David said, turning toward him. "He doesn't have to change for me, for anyone, for the world. He just has to be himself. And I'll be here, no matter what that looks like." Mikey felt the eyes of the group on them, but for once, he didn't shrink under their weight. The hand in his own didn't loosen, and the words his father spoke didn't feel like a performance. They felt like a vow. It's strange how change can come quietly, without fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes it begins in the sound of footsteps running toward you instead of away, in a phone call made at the right moment, in the choice to stay and listen when leaving would be easier. That night on the bridge had not erased the past, but it had opened a space for something different to grow. And standing there in that community hall, Mikey realized that sometimes the people who hurt you the most can still choose to be the ones who fight for you in the end if they're willing to learn what love actually means. What about you? Do you believe people can truly change if they want to? Or do some wounds never heal? Share your thoughts below, and stay with Heart Story for more stories that will stay with you long after they're told.